Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tokyo FinTech podcast. Today, I welcome William Baber, who is an associate professor at Kyoto University and also an expert on negotiation. Lastly, a co-editor of a book, Transforming Japanese Business, which was released at the end of 2019. Good morning, Will. Welcome to the show. The book was very timely. So when we talk about digital transformation in Japan at the end of 2019, we might still have had a discussion. Is it inevitable? Is it not? And that was the first chapter of the book. Now, in the middle of the pandemic, the answer might be very different. Maybe we can start with that and the pre- and post-pandemic view on the inevitability of transformation.
Yeah, so the pre-COVID, pre-pandemic view that we came to was that Japan has enough drivers that are pushing it towards serious digital transformation that it will come along. And we did not come to the conclusion that it would be happening immediately or quickly, but that it would be in process. And we identified these 7 or 8 major drivers in industry and society. The second chapter goes into the readiness and finds that Japan has a high potential and readiness for digital transformation because of education and good quality infrastructure, and generally places well in the kind of indices of, being an advanced economy, but, not moving very fast. So the first chapter unpacks specific industries and comes to the conclusion that it's gonna happen, but probably not very fast. And there's some barriers. So now post-COVID, we can look at what's happening now and say, wow, okay, there is some fast movement. Some things that we know, of course, from experience being here and the news and what have you, is work from home. Quite a good percentage of people are working from home, depending on the industry. Companies went out and spent money, according to Nikkei news surveys and so on, went out and spent money for real to build up their software and their capacity and cybersecurity. In this respect, Japan is ticking along and things are going okay. But I'll unpack some of those drivers, if that's okay.
Please.
One of them was pressure from overseas partners. So as businesses that are partner organizations digitalize, and Japan is unfortunately still using fax machines and other things that we joke about, and we make fun of them, but they indicate that so much is moving on paper that is not moving on paper in other parts of the world, that is digital. So nobody copies onto paper and then it goes into a database plugged in by a human or something. Most of the world, most partners in the business world are straight working into their databases and they'll share access. And if the Japanese side doesn't do that, it's a big negative. So that pressure is increasing and continues. But that's not heavily impacted by COVID. FinTech sector is kind of similar, I think. So this is moving along in Japan, especially regarding blockchain and consumer payments and so on. So we're seeing in 2018 and 19 market share going to Alipay from China and so on, and Line, Naver, the Korean business. So that's cooking right along, and there's a lot of acceptance in retail interaction and retail mobile for digital everything. That's continuing. The generational change is something that we have to consider is probably moving a little faster now. So part of the generational change is new people coming into the workforce and older ones going out. And part of this is the management at companies. So older management seems to show a lot of resistance and is not very tech savvy. Now with COVID forcing the issue to work from home and forcing those structures to move fast, this means the younger stars in the organizations can shine. And it means the decision-making has had to go a lot faster in January through March than is normal or comfortable in Japan. So this is forcing change. And I believe we'll see, and maybe are seeing already, movement of those older people that it's easy to call them dinosaurs. This doesn't sound nice, but they're going to be graduating out and younger people are coming in. So we also have to think about the pressure on population the overall population and the working population. Japan has been very fortunate in not having the high mortality rate that some cities and regions and even countries have had with the COVID pandemic. So Japan has been lucky and has a good, strong healthcare system and has a culture of going to the doctor when you need to, and some other benefits. And the population pressure is not coming from people dying off, fortunately. But it does mean that when people stay home to take care of their kids, or because their elderly parents and grandparents are not going to the day care or have to come back from full-time care, they're out of the workforce. So far, 2020, February to June, July, this pressure has not been too bad. If we have a second wave, which seems almost inevitable, it seems like we can't avoid getting a second wave sometime in the next couple of months. It may be much worse. It may have stronger, more dangerous strains of the virus. And if it gets to the point where schools have to shut down again, and where elder care closes and restrictions become much tighter, then people will go out of the workforce. And this will be a challenge for digitalization. So it'll means that there's the pressure to digitalize more because it saves manpower, but it means that there are fewer people to do the work. Agriculture is one of the other drivers, and this is also going to suffer from loss of manpower. And as robotics creep along in improvement, that is going to get better and easier to manage. Robotics, however, does not move as an industry as quickly as pure software does. By the time you develop a robotic product for handling certain agricultural processes, it takes a lot of time and seasons to get it to work in the mud, in the rain, in the snow, to get users comfortable with it and to get it plugged into the system. This is just something that can't move as quickly as other industries. Those things are all going to be aggravated by the lack of mobility of people. So when the governments blocked people coming in and out of countries, this meant that some workers were blocked from coming back into Japan. And this is a bit of a sore point, especially with the foreign community, because citizens could come back into the country, but permanent residents, people with work permits and so on coming back to jobs, some people were blocked out and are still out a couple months later. And the block started during the traditional vacation time in March, so it caught a lot of people out, and it means that new workers cannot come in. So Tokyo suffers from a lack of skilled labor in IT and implementation specialists and teams and so on. A certain amount of work can be offshore digitally, and that's going to happen, but hopefully we get the people back into the system. So Japan has a much stronger ecosystem around innovation and small company growth than it did 5 or 10 years ago. So I've been in Japan about 15 years. And when I came, there were hardly any incubators, and they were not well developed and not well populated. Maybe local governments didn't know so much what to do with them. Well, now we look around, I live in Kansai, so I look around Kyoto and Osaka and Kobe, and there's a lot going on. There's more funding, there's much more support from local government, and there's much more activity. And there are more entrepreneur clubs and informal and organizations and so on. So I think this benefits everyone, and this will have a positive influence in current COVID situation. Post-COVID, what kind of predictions can we make? Nobody's going to come and beat me up for a bad prediction, so I'll take a little risk. There is a recent Nikkei survey from June that says 90% of the companies are planning to continue some level of work from home. Some people will go back to the office, but we may not see full-time office occupation like we did, and we may not see as much pressure for people to be sitting in the office late. And this means productivity gains for Japan, and it means people can spend their time doing other things, including spending money. So it does mean some economic benefits for the country, and it may mean some companies can cut down on their office space. So that again means a productivity benefit in terms of profit margin and so on for many companies. Of course, this may mean a real estate glut, which will be bad for that sector until they know what to do with those properties in that space. Of course, the workers that are in, they need a bigger footprint. So traditionally, very typically in Japan, white-collar offices, the desks are physically close together, and the section boss sits at the end of the group of desks and observes. Everybody hears everything, and you are very often a meter or less from the other guy's telephone, face-to-face across a couple of books or a small table, and that's going to change. So definitely big changes in the works. 60% of companies plan to digitalize internal paperwork processes, and this means digitalization. So this is what we want and hope for. And Japan has a lot of ground to expand into this, which is the same as saying they haven't done much yet. Back to the fax machines we were talking about. This is the opportunity and the space where Japan can radically digitalize and radically transform and catch up with the overseas suppliers and buyers to get into the groove with the rest of the world. We've even had open discussion about the physical stamp, the hanko, that our Japan listeners will be familiar with, the red ink stamp that goes on papers to confirm all kinds of things, everything from purchases to internal agreements to contracts. So if that physical thing can go away and be digitalized, which other parts of the world have been comfortable digitalizing signatures and so on. These are major steps forward, structural barriers that are coming down and making things possible for Japan. So I do predict a lot of digitalization moving faster in 2020 and going on. So I have a more positive prediction than I did 6 months ago. There's still some big problems, of course, and some of those that we discuss in the book are legacy systems, and especially in the finance industry. So retail and so on, and payments, that can go digital. Digitalizing and modernizing a bank anywhere, Japan, Australia, USA, is a huge undertaking. One of the chapters in the book discusses a case in Australia that took frighteningly 5 or 10 times more money than expected to do. Because the base code was written in COBOL back in the 50s and 60s, it's not that you can turn something off and reboot it tomorrow with new software. Those are very, very big projects. And Japan does not have any more advantage or disadvantage than other places do. Non-finance industry companies have lesser barriers regarding that kind of legacy software, but they still have legacy managers and legacy processes. I expect this will be a little bit faster than it would have been otherwise, but this may still be slow. So anyway, Japan is on the move.
We use the term digitalization now for everything, and there are some quarters that differentiate between digitization and digitalization, where digitization is taking the existing process and taking the paper out, but ultimately leaving the process as it is, which also might not be the most efficient process, while digitalization is taking a business process re-engineering approach to it, right, and finding the most efficient way of doing it and maybe eliminating it. The challenge in Japan is if you have a paper process where this paper gets handed from department to department and you put it on a computer system because that's how we've always done it, and now you just want to do this digitally, you're not realizing the full potential either. So
that's right.
Some of that needs to go down to the roots of how you do the business process, the business model, which obviously also takes then a little bit more time. There's a short-term gain that you can generally get with digitization, and there's longer-term benefits with digitalization.
Right. So digitization is getting it into digital form, as you said. So getting it off the paper into a database. And digitalization, as you said, is making the existing, typically we mean making the existing process digital, skipping the paper and inputting straight into the database or what have you. And digital transformation, that's the big fish that we want to catch, that businesses and organizations need to do in order to really capture the benefits. And yes, as you said, that requires deeper rethinking. Those kind of projects take time and expertise. And this brings us back to the problem of manpower in the IT world in Japan. So Japan has, for whatever reasons, has not developed a strong IT workforce. Companies relied mainly on outsourcing and kept some IT work inside, but relied heavily on outsourcing and did not build up the workforce and the experienced managers in many cases. And most companies seem to be short of these people. And this has always been a little surprising to me because it doesn't take a lot of years to make a good software engineer or a good IT person. 2 to 5 years and you can have excellent people. But Japan has not captured those people, and therefore there's still a very big deficit. The pandemic is putting pressure on the organizations to rethink more deeply and go for that digitalization transformation. And as that happens, Japan is going to move into much higher productivity. And because this is happening, and because of the spurring and pressure from the pandemic, this is positive news for Japan's economy in the next 10 years. So we have this rather scary decrease in population and new incoming workforce in the period from 2020 to 2040 and beyond. But it's very possible for Japan to keep up with this. So Japan does have this ability to innovate under pressure and react under pressure. In some countries like the US and much of Europe, it's easy to reach for immigrants and just bring them in and you integrate them well or not so well or whatever and kind of don't worry about it. Japan is not doing that and is unlikely to do that. And this may turn out to be an unexpected benefit for Japan because in the end, there's no choice other than to be more productive. If your population is going down and people are forced to stay at home and people are going out of the workforce, the remainder have to be far more productive. And yeah, I think Japan can do this and be radically successful, I believe.
I mean, it's also from an overall societal perspective, if we believe some of the forecasts where artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics will take 50% of the current jobs away, a declining population is maybe not that bad a thing, right? You still have a relatively stable society then.
Right. We don't know exactly where those jobs are going to be taken away. It seems like they might be taken away at the middle, leaving high-end, demanding knowledge-centered jobs and manual jobs. And now Japan needs to definitely concentrate on improving productivity at the manual and low level. And that means everything from construction sites to hospitals to retail. And maybe I shouldn't say construction sites, they're relatively mechanized and productive. It's retail and daycare and education and healthcare that are low productivity. But right there in education, we saw a relatively smooth move by grade schools and K through 12 education and universities into online. They did it. Okay, so kids are going back to schools already now this past 3-4 weeks. And with the second wave, they may come right back out in the fall. But Japan did it. It was not easy or pleasant, but a lot of the work has been done. When the second wave comes, which we hope doesn't, they may be able to make even better productivity gains. So if you live in Japan, you may probably have the experience of walking by the elementary school at 7 o'clock at night and noticing that the lights are on and the teachers are in there moving pencils and pens around on paper. You know, this is pretty sad and it's very destructive and it's very low productivity. But there's a good, positive example already of digitalization right in front of us. So Japan can do it.
Absolutely. One of the easiest ways to free up capacity for innovation, doing new stuff, or even digital transformation always seems to be to stop doing something that you're doing now, which also it seems like Japanese companies have a hard time with because you started a service and you provide the service to the customers and you feel obligated to continue providing the service even if it's no longer profitable or doesn't fit into the overall scheme. And so I found it interesting was 2 weeks ago or so when Olympus said they're selling their old camera business and really now focusing only on the healthcare sector. And obviously they come out of the whole camera segment originally. So maybe that's a first green sprouts view of seeing that actually divesting something or stopping something is also a way of innovation or freeing up capacity for innovation.
Yeah, very possibly. So outside observers and activist investors have for long years urged Japanese businesses, especially the big ones, Sony and Olympus and so on, to restructure and divest. And companies like Sumitomo Chemical, for example, very diversified and probably not in a good way, definitely not in the opinion of most analysts. Also, the activist culture has caught on in the past very recent 1 or 2 years that those voices are being reacted to and are having an impact more at the board level, therefore the big corporate level, than they did in the past. So if we look over the news headlines of the past 24 months or so, we can see that. And so I believe COVID is accelerating that too.
The counterpoint on the activists is Sony, right, where the activists wanted them to divest Sony Financial, and they turned around and bought out their subsidiary and incorporated 100% in the group, which as a financial person, I think is the right move for them. It's a profitable business. Don't want to digress. The other topic, your chapter in the transformation book was also about business model innovation. So that goes more to the heart of what the company does. If we take a cynical view and saying digitization is like, it's a bit the lipstick on the pig. And obviously it's the interaction layer, whether it's B2B or B2C, truly innovating on the business model itself is a bit harder.
Right. We will see a lot of cases where relatively traditional businesses simply move processes to digital, like you said. Or they get them online and get productivity benefits there. The chapter on the Hilltop Corporation, which is in Uji, Kyoto Prefecture, is really remarkable. It's about a company that does not sit still and takes on some challenges. And one of them is their next wave digitalization. This is a company that was originally a precision machining company. They moved from mass production into prototyping and one-off production and became very specialist. That meant that their internal processes became increasingly digital over the past 20 years. That meant that they had a reasonably, not very high, but reasonably high level of technical ability. They had good engineers, like many Japanese companies do, and they had no fear of transforming and learning. So this is a company that's got a basic philosophy driven by the top manager, who is the second generation of the founders. He's looking at passing things on to the third generation now. And this manager, Mr. Yamamoto, has built up a company full of people that will sit down and learn and not complain and not be worried and not be afraid. And that will make financial commitments and then go find how to use their new capacity. So they're not sitting down and doing huge, difficult forecasting and worrying and pulling out their hair in long consensus process that we see typically in Japanese companies. These are guys who can strike while the iron is hot, take a risk, and move. And that's their culture. Very interesting company to work with, and I recommend everybody to visit their website, Hilltop Corporation. Their next upcoming step is really digitally transforming. And it means going from taking information in and doing the engineering, sending out a product, to digitally managing basically a platform for the industry. And this will mean that they are able to maximize the knowledge and digital content that they've built up over 20 years and more. So they've gone from the craft physical man standing at the lathe to CNC machining, and now a step further into this transformative situation where they will be able to do much more and access the capacities of other companies and organizations and provide a matchmaking platform that they're going to be in the center of. And this is not trivial to do. Amazon was not built in a day. Even the relatively fast-moving Google and Facebook platforms took some years to get them into the smooth working shape where they are now. When we look at platforms, they take time to develop. Uber and Lyft were able to come out with a working something, but where's their profitability? So Hilltop is a company that is able to do this because of the remarkable leadership of Mr. Yamamoto, and he is passing that on to the next generation, the younger Yamamoto. And one way they did this, and this is a blueprint for a lot of companies, I believe, is by taking a big challenge. So they were used to taking small and medium-sized challenges and risks, and their challenge was to open a location in the US overseas. This is not a crazy moonshot, we like to say. This is a California shot. It's audacious, it's bold, it's risky, but it's doable. And there's other companies out there in Japan that have done it, and there is network waiting for you there. And by gum, they're doing it. They're very successful. The California operation is growing, and this is allowing them to take those bigger, even bigger risks, another California shot, or maybe something bigger, to work on that digital, totally digital business model and platforms and other services that they are able to create. So right now, they've got a lot in their hands that can turn into real power and real additions to their industry as they develop them in the next couple of years. Big commitment, big gains.
Taking bigger risks or taking risks at all, there's always the risk of failure then, of course, as well, which you can reframe as an opportunity for learning, which is ultimately also what seems to hold many Japanese corporations back. And so how have they created a culture where it's okay to fail? Because I can't imagine 100% of their bets are working out.
Not 100%. They have not had catastrophic failures, though, which is partly due to making these kind of not crazy risks, right? So a risk that you can afford to lose. This is right in the category of what we call effectuation. So where entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs will take risks, but not the kind of 100% do or die. Risks where if you fail, you take your lumps and you regroup and you figure out what you can do next. Thing is, they're willing to take the risks and they're not sitting down. They're not letting the world go by around them. So a very powerful company, and that's one that is described in the book. And I think we'll see some examples of situations where the companies can design in Japan but don't have to make it here. So exporting can even be a problem. So we talk about, Apple has designed in California, manufactured in China. And in that model, the knowledge work is done at the home office in California. The digital knowledge mainly goes overseas to Foxconn, to China, and then the physical products go out to wherever. The new model may be something like designed in Japan or designed at headquarters, made everywhere. So lighter, smaller scale manufacturing that may be less money efficient will come into play in the market locations. And that also means 3D printing and 3D technologies will be very important, very much in play. So it means that the manufacturing can come out of the cheap developing countries and go back to the expensive market, maybe where the headquarters is. So your headquarters could be in Fukuoka or Tokyo, and your manufacturing could now suddenly be in the market that you couldn't manufacture in before in London or Southeast England. Normally it's unthinkably expensive. You don't manufacture there. You manufacture in the north of England, or you manufacture in China and ship it on a train. This could be a radical difference. So then you can have your excellent high quality product made in smallish modular manufacturing sites and get the same product made in London, in Rio, in South Africa, in micro markets and big markets, expensive markets and cheap markets, changed radically the globalization model. And this kind of thing is coming on. It's coming on at the small scale because 3D printing is here. And once companies start accessing this and getting comfortable with it, those kind of transformations, we'll be seeing this in 5 or 10 years. And that's turning the supply chain around very radically.
So essentially you're selling blueprints for a 3D printer. You're purely selling the IP, and anybody who has the investment locally in a 3D printer can then provide the service to actually manufacture, air quotes.
So you would be selling the IP or licenses to use it, or a number of times to use it, this kind of, exactly right. The ownership of the manufacturing could be totally local. It could be a bigger conglomerate that is separate from the headquarters, home company, or it could be the home company. For some products, it can go down to cottage industry, which is potentially quite nice because the means of production goes back to the worker. So Mr. Marx might even like that, instead of being in the hands of super giant companies where large-scale manufacturing has to be in the hands of super big organizations. And this will potentially move ownership down to smaller companies, smaller organizations, even mom and pop.
Yeah, I mean, if we put this into the Japanese context, then we, of course, have convenience stores that do already so many things, so many services, and adding a 3D printer to the shop should be a small matter. On the design questions, looking at it from a services perspective, and it's maybe a bit of an IT question, but globally, there seems to have a standard developed that is, of course, very Silicon Valley-ish, that says a good UI is one that is very simple and easy to understand. And Google is still like the prime case for that, where the whole search engine is just like a single box. The Japanese design on many websites is still like diametrically opposite to that. It's like as much information as you can put on there and clicking through 6 pages and filing different agreements and so on. How are we going to overcome that?
This is an issue that is partially cultural. So Japanese designers design for Japanese users, and they have success with Japanese users because they are Japanese. And they know what people are willing to take, and they know what people are comfortable with. And the Japanese users currently are comfortable with very complicated web pages and complicated click-through and so on and so forth. So this is not something that is simple to manage or can easily be managed at home. So this generally kind of localization calls for experts that are local in the market. So if you're going to make a software that people want to use outside of Japan, where your user outside of Japan is comfortable using it, it means heavy localization. And I think this is one reason why there are not a lot of Japanese online services and apps that are out there. So Rakuten is very Japanesey feeling when you work through the interfaces, and it's not going to win in Europe and North America. Now, Japanese games and video industry, to come full circle back to where we were talking before, have had successes, huge successes, in practically every market, from casual gaming to consoles to mobile and what have you. So that's a great model to look to. So there are Japanese companies that are devoted to localizing and bringing in foreign games and so on and Japanizing them. And there are also services out there in the world that do the reverse, that localize Japanese games to other markets. However, again, Japanese games have been successful as made. So we've come a long way from the Atari games and all your base are belong to us, these kind of fun errors from the 1980s or so. So this is an industry that has a lot to teach other industries in Japan about reaching out to foreign markets.
Totally. And also putting it back into the talent question, where you get the IT talent from. And I ask many startups, where are you getting the engineering talent for your company? Often the answer is, well, we hire from the gaming companies, because that's if you have good Japanese software engineer, they most likely working for these companies. So What I find interesting about the gaming sector is if you go back all the way to its origin, was like in the 80s, you had Nintendo, then you had Sega coming up, and then you had Sony with the PlayStation. It's also been always a market that's been highly competitive. And you can't say this about many other industries, especially domestically. And there's more cohabitation of three big groups, right, that corner the market, and they're really not actively competing as much. And in gaming, there's more like of this raw spirit of competition still in there. Do you think the kind of the intensity of competition is also a factor in this whole transformation story?
I'm sure it is. So competition means pressure, and pressure means movement and innovation. An example of a very innovative part of Japanese industry is sweets manufacturing. So I tell visitors to Japan, let's go to the store and see what's interesting, because they are innovating incremental innovations of flavors and packaging and product and size, and it's very, very competitive. The video game industry, I think you're right, is quite a bit similar here. So there's many, many small companies and not so many big ones. The big ones are Nintendo and Sony, and they don't have a lock on the industry the way the big car manufacturers do. Because of that, the small and medium-sized companies, not only in gaming, but especially video games, do have a lot of can-do spirit and a lot of ability to do things. Now, anytime you make a game, you're taking a risk, okay, because you just don't know how it's going to be accepted until it's out there. So this puts them in a similar category or a similar mindset to Hilltop Corporation that I was talking about. The whole video game industry has to take risks with every new title. This means, they might take an existing title and do tweaks and expansions and expand the brand and expand modules and so on. It's a little safer, but even that, if they make a miss or something that people don't like or don't care about, they're in trouble. So they're facing this all the time. So it's, partly competition, partly that kind of effectual process where they take calculated, small and medium-sized risks and they just don't know. That puts them into a mindset of entrepreneurial thinking.
All right, I think we're almost out of time. Thanks very much for the insight. We should probably take a checkpoint 18, 24 months from now. And so if we still have Hankos, then everything has flipped back.
So the pandemic is pressure. Pressure is good for innovation. We just hope that the pressure is bearable and that it's not too bad. To all the listeners, continue please to be very safe about hygiene and wearing masks and proximity to other people. We have to be super careful. Can't change that until we get vaccines or treatments that will turn it around.
So thanks very much, Will. Great conversation, and looking forward to doing another one on negotiation in the future.
Would like to do that. All right. Thanks a lot, Norbert. Nice talking with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.